My name is Jake Callahan. If you knew me down at the local hardware store or saw me grabbing coffee at Millie's Diner, you'd probably just see another guy easing into his late 50s, maybe early 60s if the light's bad. A little thicker around the middle than I used to be, lines etched around my eyes that weren't just from laughing. Retired. That's the word most folks would use. Retired from what they don't ask. They assume construction, maybe trucking, something that wears a man down. They wouldn't be entirely wrong about the wearing down part. But the truth is something I've kept buried deeper than a winter grave for the last 10 years. I'm a retired monster hunter. Go ahead, chuckle if you need to. Get it out of your system. I know how it sounds. Like something out of a cheap pulp novel or a late-night cable movie. Trust me, the reality is a damn sight grimmer, dirtier, and leaves scars you can't see, but feel every time the wind howls a certain way or the shadows stretch too long at dusk. There's no glory, no cool gadgets most of the time, no witty banter before vanquishing evil. There's just fear cold, primal fear exhaustion. The metallic tang of blood, yours and not yours, and the crushing weight of knowing things that would make most people's sanity fray at the edges. I hung it up, put away the tools of a trade nobody knows exists, sold the reinforced truck, burned the journals filled with sketches that still give me nightmares, and tried my best to forget. Moved to this quiet corner of the Pacific Northwest, bought a small cabin with enough land that my nearest neighbor is a comfortable half-mile away. Tried to blend in, become normal. For a while, it almost worked. Almost. But something's been stirring lately. Not just in the woods around my property, though the quiet out here feels thinner than it used to. It's the stories. Whispers on the internet, frantic posts on forums that vanish almost as soon as they appear, missing person reports from national parks that get filed away as exposure or animal attack, despite details that make the hair on my arms stand on end. People are getting careless, arrogant. They watch survival shows, buy fancy gear, think they can conquer the wild. They hike off trail, camp in remote areas, go alone. Alone, that's the cardinal sin. That's the mistake that doesn't always offer a second chance. So, I'm breaking my silence. Not for fame, God no. Not for belief, either, frankly. I don't give a damn if you believe me or not. I'm doing this because maybe, just maybe, one person will read this and think twice before stepping off that marked path, before convincing themselves that the snap of a twig is just a deer, before venturing into the deep, quiet woods all by themselves. If I can save one person from becoming another statistic, another whispered story, another meal, then maybe dredging up these memories will be worth the sleepless nights it's already costing me. Consider this a warning from someone who's been in the shadows, who's seen what waits there. My first piece of advice, the one that underpins everything else, don't explore. The woods. Alone. It sounds simple, almost insultingly so. You think of getting lost, twisting an ankle, maybe running into a bear or a mountain lion. Those are legitimate dangers, sure, but they're mundane, predictable, even. What I'm talking about operates on a different level. The things I hunted, the things that are still out there, they use the isolation. They rely on it. The deep woods aren't just their habitat, they are their hunting ground, their pantry, and their sanctuary, all rolled into one. When you go in alone, you're not just entering their territory, you're serving yourself up on a silver platter. You remove the complications of witnesses, of backup, of someone raising the alarm quickly. You become easy prey. Let me tell you about the first time I truly understood this. Not just intellectually, but in my bones, in the place where instinct screams louder than reason. I was young, mid-20s, cocky as hell. I hadn't inherited the job yet, not officially. My uncle, Silas, was the one who carried the burden then. He was a gruff, quiet man. Looked like he'd wrestled bears for a living, which, metaphorically speaking, wasn't far off. He'd occasionally drop cryptic warnings, show me strange symbols, teach me tracking skills that went beyond identifying deer scat. I thought he was eccentric, maybe a little paranoid from spending too much time in the wilderness himself. I hadn't seen it yet. The call came about a missing hiker. Daniel Stern, college kid, went hiking in the Siskiyou National Forest in southern Oregon. Not exactly the deep, dark heart of nowhere, but big enough, wild enough. He was experienced, supposedly well equipped. Told his roommate he was doing a solo overnight trip, exploring a less traveled loop trail. He was due back Sunday evening. By Tuesday morning, when he hadn't shown up for class, the alarm was raised. Search and rescue did their thing. Found his car at the trailhead. Followed the marked trail for a few miles. Found a campsite. Looked like his tent set up. Sleeping bag inside some wrappers. But no Daniel. They swept the area, expanding the grid. Nothing. Dogs lost the scent abruptly near a dense thicket about half a mile from his camp. Wouldn't go further. That's when the local sheriff, a man who owed Silas a significant, unspoken favor from years back, made a quiet call. Silas dragged me along. Time you saw the real world, Jake? He'd grunted, tossing a heavy canvas duffel bag at my feet. It wasn't filled with camping gear. We arrived under the pretense of being expert trackers, volunteering to help. SAR was packing up most of their operation, shifting to a recovery mindset. The mood was grim. We got the rundown, looked at the maps, listened to the SAR team leader describe how the dogs reacted near the thicket, whining, hackles raised, refusing to proceed. Red flag number 1. Silas didn't bother with the main trail or the campsite. He went straight for that thicket. It was an ugly knot of manzanita, thorny bushes, and young firs packed so tight you could barely see 10 feet in. The air there felt different, colder, quieter. The usual forest hum, insects, birds. The rustle of small animals was absent. Dead silent. Red flag number 2. He went in here, Silas stated, not asked. He pointed to a barely perceptible break in the undergrowth. A few snapped twigs, scuff marks on the dirt that didn't look like typical boot prints. They were dragged. Sideways. Why would he go in there? I asked, peering into the gloom. The trail's back that way. This is impassable. Silas just gave me a look. One of those looks that said, "You still don't get it, do you?" He pulled a long, heavy-bladed machete from his duffel and started hacking a path. He also handed me something heavy and metallic. A maglite. No, it was heavier, colder. A modified flashlight, reinforced casing, with a strange lens. And strapped to the side, almost hidden, was a trigger mechanism. Keep this ready. Don't turn it on unless I say so. And stay behind me. His voice was low, deadly serious. The casual eccentricity was gone. This was a different man. We pushed into the thicket. It was slow going. The branches snagged at our clothes, thorns tore at our skin. The silence pressed in, heavy and suffocating. After about 50 yards, the ground started to slope downwards into a shallow, damp ravine choked with ferns and moss-covered rocks, and the smell hit us. Coppery rank, sweetish almost, the smell of a slaughterhouse left open in the sun. Bile rose in my throat. Then we saw them. Not Daniel's hiking boots. Not bear, not cougar, not anything I recognized. They were large, vaguely humanoid, but the stride was too long, the impressions too deep, like something immensely heavy had passed through, and the shape wrong. 3 broad toes, talon, like claws digging into the mud. Interspersed with them were more drag marks. Silas knelt, examining a track. He touched the edge, looked at his fingers. Still damp, recent, he muttered, moving fast. He pointed his chin further down the ravine. We followed the tracks deeper into the tangle. The ravine narrowed. The sides grew steeper. The canopy overhead was so dense that it felt like twilight, even though it was midday. The air grew colder still. I could see my breath fogging. Red flag number 3, unnatural temperature drop. That's when I heard it. A faint clicking sound. Cheek-cheek-kick. Like oversized insects rubbing their legs together, but deeper. Guttural. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Silas froze. He slowly raised a hand signaling silence. He tilted his head, listening intently. The clicking faded, then returned slightly closer. Kiki. He gestured for me to stay put, then crept forward, machete held low. He moved with a fluid grace that surprised me, vanishing around a mossy boulder. I stood there, heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird, clutching the heavy flashlight thing. The silence stretched, broken only by the chick, which seemed to be circling now, closer, louder. Then a strangled cry, not Silas, higher pitched. It was cut off abruptly. My blood ran cold. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get out of that ravine, out of the thicket, back to the sunlight and the normal world. But Silas was in there. Silas, I whispered, my voice trembling. No answer. Just the clicking. Check, check. It was right behind the boulder Silas had disappeared behind. Screw staying put. I raised the flashlight, my thumb hovering over the switch Silas had warned me about. I edged towards the boulder, peering around it. What I saw is burned into my memory. Silas was there, backed against the ravine wall. He wasn't hurt, but he was focused, a cheat held defensively. Standing over a crumpled shape on the ground, Daniel Stern, or what was left of him, was it? It was tall, maybe 7 feet, impossibly thin, like stretched sinew over sharp bone. Its skin was the color of wet bark, mottled green and brown, blending almost perfectly with the shadows and moss. Its limbs were too long, jointed at odd angles. The head was small, wedge-shaped, with no discernible eyes that I could see, just pits of shadow. A wide, vertical gash of a mouth stretched nearly the length of its head, filled with needle-like teeth. It was hunched over Daniel's body, and one of its 3 toed feet rested possessively on his chest. Its long, spindly arms ended in hands that were more like clusters of hooked claws. And the clicking sound, it was coming from its throat, a rapid vibration of cartilage and bone. It hadn't noticed me yet. Its attention was fixed on Silas, who was slowly circling, trying to draw it away from the body. Then it shifted. Its head swiveled, the shadowed pits seeming to fix on me. The clicking stopped. A low hiss, like escaping steam, replaced it. It took a step towards me, its movements jerky but unnervingly fast. "Jake! The light! Now!" Silas roared. My thumb slammed down on the switch. It wasn't a normal beam. A blinding, ultraviolet, white light erupted from the lens, pulsed with an audible thrum. It hit the creature square in the chest. It shrieked. A sound that wasn't animal or human, a tearing, high-pitched scream that scraped nerves raw. It recoiled violently, shielding its face, pits with those clawed hands. The bark, like skin, seemed to blister and smoke where the light touched it. It stumbled back, crashing through the undergrowth with incredible speed, the shriek echoing as it fled deeper into the woods. The silence that fell afterward was deafening, broken only by my ragged breathing and the steady drip of water somewhere in the ravine. Silas rushed over, grabbing the light from my shaking hand, switching it off. "You all right?" His voice was tight. I couldn't speak. I just stared at Daniel's body. The creature hadn't just killed him. It had started to prepare him. I won't describe it. You don't need those images in your head. Suffice it to say, it wasn't quick, and it wasn't merciful. Wendigo? I finally choked out, remembering some of Silas's darker tales. Silas shook his head, wiping sweat and grime from his face. No, older. More primal. Something that lives in the deep places, doesn't like the light, doesn't like witnesses. Sometimes called a timber creeper or snatcher. Mostly, they take animals, but sometimes they get a taste for something else, especially if it wanders into their larder alone. He looked down at Daniel. Poor kid. Never stood a chance. Probably grabbed him right out of his tent while he was sleeping. Dragged him here. He was alone. Easy target. No one to hear him scream. We couldn't bring Daniel's body out. Not easily, not without explaining things we couldn't explain. Silas used his radio, a modified one that didn't use standard frequencies, to call in an anonymous tip about finding the body's location, making it sound like we stumbled upon it from a different direction, far from the thicket. We cleaned up our tracks as best we could, hacking our way out via a different route, leaving the ravine and its horrors behind. Later, sitting by a fire miles away, Silas finally looked at me, his eyes old and tired. "You see now, Jake, why you don't go alone. The woods, they're not empty. They have rules, and they have residents who enforce them. You go in alone, you're broadcasting weakness. You're an invitation. Doesn't matter how tough you think you are, how much gear you have. When you're alone, and it decides it wants you, you just meet." That was my first real lesson. It wasn't my last. The things I saw later, the things I hunted, some were smarter than the creeper. Some were crueler. Some could walk in daylight, wear human faces. But the fundamental truth remained, especially in the wild places, the deep woods where the maps get thin, and the trails disappear. Isolation is death. Going alone is suicide by ignorance. This story, this creeper, it's just an appetizer, really. A relatively simple predator operating on instinct. It gets worse, much worse. There are things out there that hunt minds as well as bodies. Things that twist the woods themselves into traps. Things that make you wish you were alone when they find you. But start with this. Remember Daniel Stern. Remember the silence, the cold, the clicking. Remember my warning. Whatever you think you might find out there, solitude, adventure, peace, weigh it against what might find you. Don't explore the woods alone. Your life might depend on remembering that. More stories to come, if you've got the stomach for them. Because the woods are dark and deep, and some things that live there haven't forgotten the taste of mankind. It feels strange, putting these things down. Like bleeding onto the page. Part of me keeps expecting a knock on the door, someone in a dark suit telling me to shut my mouth about things best left buried. But that hasn't happened. Instead, I've gotten, well, mostly silence, which is what I expected. Maybe a few raised eyebrows from the handful of locals I shared the link with under strict anonymity. But if even one person paused at a trailhead, looked into the dense trees, felt a prickle of doubt about their solo hike and turned back, worth it. Because that timber creeper from the Siskios, that was just basic training. A simple predator, ugly, dangerous, sure, but predictable in its own way. Hunger, territory, aversion to specific stimuli. Manageable. If you knew what you were doing and weren't caught completely unprepared like poor Daniel Stern. The real problem is, not everything that waits in the woods is just hungry. Some things are patient. Some things are clever. Some things don't just want your flesh, they want your mind. They thrive on confusion, disorientation, and the particular vulnerability that settles over you when you realize you are utterly, irrevocably alone miles from anything familiar. That's the next lesson. Being alone doesn't just make you an easier target physically, it makes you an easier target mentally. Your senses start playing tricks on you even in normal circumstances when you're isolated in the wild. Fatigue, fear, the monotony of the trail, they soften you up. And some things out there, they know how to exploit that. They know how to whisper in the spaces between the rustling leaves, how to twist the familiar into the menacing, how to use the very silence against you until you can't trust your own eyes or ears. This one happened about 15 years ago. Silas was still around, but semi-retired, mostly pointing me towards trouble rather than wading in himself. Said my legs were younger and my nerves less frayed. I wasn't so sure about the nerves part after this. The location was the Appalachian Trail. Not the whole thing, obviously, but a specific stretch in central Pennsylvania, known locally for being tricky. Not particularly steep or technically difficult. But the trail markers had a habit of disappearing, compasses would sometimes spin erratically, and hikers occasionally reported feeling disoriented, losing hours of time, or hearing voices. Most incidents were written off inexperienced hikers, dehydration, natural magnetic deposits affecting compasses. Standard explanations, but the disappearances were piling up. Not many, maybe one every year or two, but always lone hikers. Experienced ones, often. People who shouldn't just vanish without a trace. The call didn't come from law enforcement this time. It came from a woman named Sarah Bishop. Her brother Mark had gone missing on that stretch 3 months prior. He was a seasoned backpacker, meticulous planner, equipped with a GPS, personal locator beacon, PLB, the works. He'd checked in via satellite messenger the first night, sounding fine. Then nothing. The official search found his pack, neatly placed beside the trail near a section known as Whisper Gap. Inside were his GPS, his satellite messenger, his food, water filter, everything but his sleeping bag and Mark himself. The PLB was never activated. No signs of struggle, no animal tracks, nothing. He'd just stepped off the trail and vanished into thin air. Sarah wasn't buying the official got lost and succumbed to the elements line. She'd found my uncle's L very discreet, contact information through a chain of hushed referrals, people who dealt with things that didn't make the papers. She sounded desperate but lucid. She mentioned the local legends about Whisper Gap, stories older than the trail itself, about people getting turned around, lured off by voices, losing their way and their minds. She mentioned the compass issues the missing time. She didn't know what happened, but she knew it wasn't normal. Silas listened in on the call, then looked at me. Sounds like your kind of headache, Jake. Something that plays with your head. Remember rule number 1. Don't go alone. I sighed, especially not there, he grunted. If what Sarah and the old stories say is true, going alone is exactly what it wants. But going in numbers might spook it into hiding. You'll need to go in, seem alone, but not be alone. That meant tech. Back then, we didn't have the constant satellite connectivity we have now, but Silas had rigged up a system. A modified radio with a directional antenna set to a frequency scramble only his receiver could decode. A panic button that sent a focused burst signal. Not perfect, but better than nothing. He'd be parked a few miles away, monitoring, ready to come crashing in if things went sideways. It felt thin, but it was the best we could do to maintain the illusion of solitude. So I went in. Packed like a standard through hiker, maybe a bit heavy on the water, and specialized, gear hidden at the bottom of my pack, things that looked like geology tools, weather sensors, but weren't, including a couple of devices sealers called sonic dampeners, supposed to interfere with certain frequencies, both audible and subconscious. And of course, the modified UV emitter flashlight. Just in case, I started my hike a few miles south of Whisper Gap, mimicking Mark's presumed route. The first day was normal. Beautiful country, challenging hike, saw a few other hikers, all groups or pairs. The unease didn't start until the second day, as I approached the notorious section. The air grew still, not silent like in the Siskiyous, but muffled, like the world was holding its breath. The birdsong seemed distant, the buzz of insects faded. The trail itself seemed narrower, hemmed in by dense rhododendron thickets and tall, ancient-looking oaks. The light filtering through the canopy took on a strange, greenish quality. I checked my compass. It spun lazily, unwilling to settle. My GPS signal flickered, then died. Satellite interference, it read. Right on schedule. I kept walking, deliberately projecting an air of casual confidence. Just another hiker enjoying the solitude. But my senses were on high alert. Every rustle, every shadow seemed magnified. I started noticing odd things. A brightly colored child's toy half buried in the leaves just off the trail. Looked brand new, miles from any road or access point. Further on, a single, pristine white glove lying on a mossy rock. Then, a page torn from a book, fluttering from a low-branch poetry. Something about being lost. Little breadcrumbs of wrongness. Then came the whispers. At first, I thought it was the wind in the leaves, or maybe my own tinnitus acting up. A faint susurrus, just at the edge of hearing. Shit over here, sish. I stopped, strained to listen. Silence. I walked on, and it returned. Lost. It wasn't the wind. It sounded like voices, multiple voices, interwoven, indistinct. Sometimes it sounded like snippets of conversation, other times like pleading, sometimes like soft, mocking laughter, always seeming to come from just off the trail, deeper in the trees. Hello, I called out, playing dumb. Anyone there? The whispering stopped instantly. The woods felt like they were listening, waiting. I pushed on, gripping my trekking poles tighter. The trail began to loop and twist in ways that didn't match the map I'd memorized. Sections I felt I'd already passed seemed to reappear. The sun seemed fixed in the sky, the afternoon stretching unnaturally long. Or maybe I was losing time. I checked my watch. It had stopped. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to claw its way up my throat. This is how it gets you, I thought. Confusion, doubt, making you question your own senses. I stopped, took a deep breath, forced myself to be methodical. Pulled out one of the sonic dampeners, a small metallic cylinder. Twisted the base to activate it. It emitted a low, barely audible hum. The whispering didn't stop, but it changed. It seemed thinner now, less immediate, like a radio station fading out of tune. The oppressive stillness lessened slightly. Okay, step one. Interference helps. I kept walking, focusing intently on the trail beneath my feet, ignoring the phantom sounds and the disorienting landscape. I passed the spot where Saar had found Mark's pack. Just a little clearing beside the trail. Nothing sinister about it in the dim light. But as I looked closer, I saw faint scuff marks leading away from the pack, into the dense woods. Not drag marks like with Daniel's stern. These were footprints. Normal boot prints, matching the type Mark was supposed to wear. He'd walked away. Willingly. Then I heard it. Clear as day. Not a whisper. A voice. Jakey, is that you? I froze. It sounded exactly like Sarah Bishop, Mark's sister. Jake! Over here! I came to look for Mark myself. I think I found something. The voice came from deeper in the woods, off to my left. My heart hammered. Sarah. Impossible. She was hundreds of miles away. It had to be a trick. A mimicry. Sarah called back, trying to get the tremor out of my voice. Hurry. It's Mark! He's hurt. The voice was laced with panic, perfectly mimicking Sarah's tones. Every instinct screamed trap. Don't leave the path. Don't follow the voice. But the emotion in it, the sheer terror, it sounded so real. What if by some insane coincidence it was her? What if Mark was alive? This is how it works. A colder part of my brain reminded me. It finds what you care about. It uses hope as bait. I stayed put, gripped the dampener. Where are you, Sarah? Stay there. I'll come around on the trail. No time. He's fading. Please, Jake, just come straight here. It's not far. The voice was pleading, desperate. It was starting to sound slightly distorted now, the mimicry fraying around the edges as if strained by the dampener's effect. That sealed it. It wasn't Sarah. I unslung my pack, pulling out the second dampener and activating it. The low hum intensified. I also grabbed the UV emitter. The whispering, which had started creeping back around the edges of the Sarah voice, now died away completely. The air cleared further, the oppressive weight lifting. The Sarah voice let out a frustrated shriek, the mimicry dissolving into a discordant blend of static and rage. Come here. It wasn't pleading anymore, it was commanding, demanding, then silence. Complete, utter silence. The woods felt empty, not peaceful empty, vacant. Like whatever had been focusing on me had retreated. I stood there for a long moment, catching my breath, the adrenaline slowly receding. It hadn't shown itself, whatever it was. A lure, a mimic. Silas had mentioned entities that fed on psychic energy, on the emotions generated by fear and confusion, luring victims off marked paths into places they could be drained. Or perhaps into the territory of something else. Sometimes these things worked in tandem. I cautiously moved off the trail, following the direction the voice had come from, UV emitter held ready. The dampeners seemed to keep the immediate vicinity clear of the psychic interference. After maybe 30 yards, pushing through tangled underbrush, I found it. A small, hollow depression in the ground, almost like a shallow bowl, lined with dry leaves. And in the center, a sleeping bag. Mark Bishop's sleeping bag. It was zipped closed. My stomach turned to ice. I approached slowly, probing the bag with the end of a trekking pole. It wasn't empty. There was a weight inside. With trembling hands, I reached down and slowly pulled the zipper. It wasn't Mark. Not exactly. It looked like Mark, based on the photo Sarah had shown me. Same features, same build. But his skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over his bones. His eyes were wide open, staring blankly at the sky, but the pupils were completely dilated, swallowing the irises. His mouth was open in a silent scream. He wasn't breathing. He wasn't decaying either, despite being missing for 3 months. He was preserved, like a horrifying mannequin, drained. Utterly, completely drained of life, of energy, maybe even of his soul. And nestled beside him in the bag, almost like a child's security blanket, was the source of the mimicry. A grotesque thing, like a fleshy, pulsating knot of grey matter the size of a human head, covered in fine, quivering cilia. Thin, translucent tendrils snaked from it, burrowing subtly into the base of Mark's skull. It wasn't the lure itself, perhaps, but maybe an anchor point. A psychic amplifier. The moment the dampener's field touched it, the cilia writhed, and the thing emitted a silent, psychic shriek that lanced through my head, making me stagger back, clutching my temples. Even with the dampeners, the focused blast was agony. I reacted on instinct, raised the UV emitter and blasted it. The effect was instantaneous and violent. The grey, fleshy mass convulsed, blistered, and seemed to implode, collapsing in on itself with a wet, sucking sound, leaving behind only a greasy black smear and the acrid smell of ozone and burnt meat. The tendrils retracted from Mark's body like startled snakes. Mark's expression didn't change. He remained a hollow statue, eyes wide, mouth open. Whatever that thing was, whatever it had done, it wasn't reversible. I couldn't bring him out, not like this. Explaining a preserved body drained by a psychic brain parasite. Not happening. I did what I had to do. Used a small incendiary charge from my geology tools quick, hot, almost ashless. Said a few words for Mark, for Sarah, erased the scene as best I could. Getting back to the trail, back through Whisper Gap was nerve-wracking, but the oppressive atmosphere was gone. The compass settled. My watch started ticking again. The woods felt normal, if watchful. I radioed sealers with a coded message, target neutralized, victim confirmed lost, site cleansed. Proceeding to extraction. The debrief with Sealus was grim. He called the entity a siren root, or mind leech, usually anchored near places with natural psychic or magnetic anomalies. It didn't physically consume victims, but drained their life force, their consciousness, using their own memories and emotions to create lures. Often, it used the stolen energy to sustain itself and amplify its luring radius. Lone hikers, isolated and already prone to suggestion, were prime targets. Their focus narrows, their fears rise, and the leech whispers exactly what they want, or fear, to hear. It takes them off the path, Silas said, his voice gravelly. Lids them somewhere quiet, puts them to sleep forever. Feeds slow. Sometimes they last for months. Trapped in a dream while it drains them dry. And you alone, hearing a voice you recognize, that's the hook. It almost got you to break the rule. He was right. The urge to follow Sarah's voice, the hope that Mark might be alive, had been powerful. If I hadn't had the dampeners, if I hadn't recognized the distortion, if I'd been truly alone without Silas listening miles away, I might have become another empty shell in a sleeping bag, hidden just yards off the trail. So, that's the second lesson. The woods can attack your mind just as easily as your body, especially when you're alone. The silence, the isolation, it creates openings. Things can slip in. Voices, illusions, false hopes, paralyzing fears. They can turn your own thoughts against you, make you walk willingly into the trap. Don't trust the voices. Don't trust the convenient coincidences. Don't assume that Russell is just an animal, or that feeling of being watched is just paranoia. And above all, don't make it easy for them. Don't explore the woods alone, because sometimes the thing that gets you doesn't have claws or teeth. Sometimes it just whispers your name and the next story. Well, sometimes the threat isn't just in the woods. Sometimes it is the woods. So, we've talked about predators that stalk the lonely paths, creatures of tooth and claw like the creeper. We've talked about psychic parasites like the mind leech, things that turn your own thoughts into bait and drain you hollow from the inside out, thriving on the vulnerability of solitude. Both bad ways to go. Both good reasons to heed my warning. Don't explore the woods alone. But what happens when the threat isn't a distinct entity in the woods? What happens when the woods themselves seem to turn against you? It sounds like something out of a fairy tale, doesn't it? Angry trees shifting paths, the forest itself having a malevolent will. Most people would dismiss it as disorientation, panic, maybe hallucinations brought on by exhaustion or eating the wrong berries, and usually they'd be right. But not always. There are places, old places, deep woods that have soaked up centuries of something. An awareness maybe, an intelligence, slow alien, and deeply territorial. Places where the usual rules of nature seem bent, where the barrier between flora and fauna feels unnervingly thin. Places that don't just harbor monsters, they are the monster. And going into such a place alone, that's like willingly stepping into the stomach of a beast that digests you one wrong turn at a time. This particular nightmare fuel comes courtesy of a patch of temperate rainforest tucked away in the Olympic Peninsula, Washington State. Not the main, tourist heavy-haul rainforest trail, but a deeper, less accessible valley known on old, obscure maps and in local whispers as Skookum Deep. Skookum is a Chinook jargon word, can mean strong, brave, or monstrous, often used in reference to Bigfoot-type legends. But the stories about the deep weren't about hairy ape men. They were about the trees, about the forest itself. Loggers in the early 20th century tried to push into Skookum Deep. They reported equipment malfunctions, tools disappearing, felled trees vanishing overnight. Surveyors complained of markers being moved, trails becoming impossibly overgrown in hours, compasses acting erratically, and a pervasive, unsettling feeling of being watched, not by animals, but by the ancient moss, draped maples, and colossal Sitka spruce. Accidents happen with alarming frequency. Eventually, the logging company pulled out, citing unstable terrain and prohibitive costs. The valley was left alone, swallowed back by the relentless green. Fast forward to about 10 years before I retired. Silas was mostly out of the game by then, content to feed me leads and offer cryptic advice. This one came via an old contact, a retired park ranger who'd spent his life in the Olympics. He'd heard chatter. A group of 4 experienced backcountry hikers, ecological researchers doing unauthorized surveying, had gone into Skookum Deep 2 weeks prior. They had satellite phones, GPS, everything. They were supposed to check in every 3 days. They missed the first check-in, then the second. SAR teams made cautious attempts to penetrate the valley, but were hampered by sudden, localized storms, inexplicably blocked trails in massive, freshly fallen trees that hadn't been there hours before, and equipment failures. They pulled back, officially labeling the area too hazardous for search operations. The old ranger didn't believe it was just bad luck or weather. He remembered the old stories, the loggers' reports. He mentioned a local tribal elder who had warned him decades ago, Skookum Deep doesn't like being disturbed. It digests disturbances, especially lonely ones. That last part chilled me. He thought maybe, just maybe, someone with my uncle's Ezra and by extension, my peculiar expertise might stand a chance, or at least figure out what happened. This time, the don't go alone rule presented a paradox. If the forest itself was hostile, would a group provide safety, or just a bigger target? The ranger's contact mentioned the elder's lonely ones comment. Silas, when I consulted him, had a theory based on similar, thankfully rare, cases in his burned journals. Some genius loci, spirits of place, they operate on attention. He'd rasped over the phone. A single mind, isolated, is easier to focus on, to manipulate, to process. A group might diffuse its attention, make it harder for it to get a grip. But if it's strong enough, it might just try to separate you, pick you off one by one. Your best bet. Go in small, stay tight, constant communication, and have an exit strategy that doesn't rely on the path you took in. So, I wasn't going alone this time. I called in backup. not hunters, but specialists of a different sort. Maya, a geologist with a side interest in folklore and anomalous energy readings, sharp as a tack and steady under pressure. And Ben, ex-military SR, walking encyclopedia of survival skills, could probably navigate blindfolded through a hurricane. We trusted each other implicitly, having worked together on a couple of hairy cases before. Small team, tight unit. We went in heavy. Not just standard gear, but specialized sensors Maya had rigged to detect electromagnetic fluctuations, infrasound unusual biological energy signatures. Ben carried breaching tools, climbing gear, enough signaling devices to light up a small town, and a healthy dose of skepticism that kept us grounded. I carried my usual toolkit, including the dampeners, the UV emitter you never know, and something Silas had developed for situations like this, a sonic resonator tuned to frequencies, supposed to disrupt large-scale biological cohesion. Basically, a fancy tuning fork designed to give ancient, angry plant life a migraine. We also carried axes and saws, not just for clearing paths, but on the grim theory that if the woods turned actively aggressive, we might need to fight back. Entering Skookum Deep felt like stepping into another world. The air immediately became thick, humid, smelling intensely of damp earth, decaying wood, and a strange, almost floral sweetness that was slightly nauseating. The light was dim, filtered through layers upon layers of canopy, casting everything in an emerald gloom. Moss hung like tattered shrouds from every branch, covering tree trunks feet thick. The ground was a soft carpet of decaying needles and humus. Swallowing sound, it was eerily quiet, yet felt intensely alive. Almost immediately, our tech started acting up. GPS signals became intermittent, then vanished. Our radios, even the encrypted ones, crackled with static. Maya's sensors flickered erratically, showing spikes of EM energy with no discernible source. Ben's compass needle did slow, lazy circles. "Okay, map and terrain association from here on out," Ben said, his voice calm, but his eyes scanning the dense walls of green around us. "Stay within visual contact." No wandering. We followed what seemed to be the faint trace of the researcher's path, marked occasionally by snapped twigs or faded boot prints in the mud. The going was slow, the undergrowth thick and tangled. The silence pressed in, broken only by the drip of water and the occasional loud crack from deep within the woods, like a large tree branch snapping, but somehow more deliberate. After a few hours, the feeling of being watched started. Not by eyes. It was a prickling sensation on the skin, a feeling of pressure, like the air itself was observing us. The trees seemed closer together than they should be, their massive trunks like silent, moss-covered sentinels. I noticed the patterns in the bark seemed to swirl, almost resembling faces or grasping hands if you looked too long. "Getting that somebody's walking over my grave feeling," Maya murmured, checking her sensors again. "Energy readings are weird, not localized. It's like the whole valley is humming." Then the path began to change. We'd navigate around a fallen giant, a detour of maybe 50 yards, and when we rejoined the main trace, it felt different. The trees seemed older, the moss thicker. We backtracked once, convinced we'd taken a wrong turn, only to find the section we'd just passed subtly altered, the fallen giant now seeming to lie at a different angle. "It's messing with us," Ben stated grimly. "Trying to turn us around, get us lost." He pulled out fluorescent marking tape, tying strips to branches every 20 feet. "Let's see if it moves these." It did. An hour later, we circled back as a test, following our own trail. The tapes were gone. Not fallen off. Vanished, and the path itself seemed to lead into an impenetrable wall of thorny vines that hadn't been there before. Panic began to bubble beneath the surface. We were experienced, disciplined, but the feeling of the environment actively working against us was deeply unnerving. It felt personal, malicious. We pushed on, hacking through the vines, trying to maintain our heading by the sun's faint position through the canopy. That's when we found the first sign of the researchers. A backpack, half swallowed by a mound of rapidly growing moss and fungus, roots already weaving through the fabric. Inside, journals. The entries started normally scientific observations, excitement about the unique ecosystem. Then they grew strained. Complaints about disorientation, missing equipment, the oppressive silence, the feeling of being watched. The last entry was hurried, almost illegible. "Trees are moving. John taken last night. Heard snapping, then silence. Sarah screamed his name. Path behind us gone. It's boxing us in. Can't see the sky. The green, it's everywhere, hungry." Chilled, we moved with renewed urgency. The forest seemed to respond, the air growing colder, the shadows deepening. We heard sounds now, creaking wood, that sounded like whispers, rustling leaves that mimicked footsteps circling us, a low, groaning sound like stressed timber that seemed to vibrate up from the ground itself. Then Maya cried out. A thick, vine-like root, indistinguishable from the others covering the ground, had snaked around her ankle, pulling her off balance. Before Ben or I could react, more roots erupted from the earth, wrapping around her legs, her waist, pulling her towards the base of a huge, ancient maple tree whose bark seemed to writhe within a movement. Ben was there in a second, his axe a blur, chopping at the roots. They were tough, fibrous, bleeding a thick, milky sap that sizzled slightly where it touched the axe blade. I activated the sonic resonator, aiming it at the base of the tree. The groaning sound intensified, becoming a deafening, low-frequency thrum that shook the very air. The roots paused, loosening slightly. "Keep hitting it!" Ben yelled, hacking Maya free. She scrambled back, eyes wide with terror. The tree itself seemed to react to the resonator. Branches high above thrashed, though there was no wind. The bark rippled. A section of the trunk near the base split open, revealing not solid wood, but a dark, wet cavity filled with pulsating organic matter and the white gleam of bone. Human bone, fused and embedded within the wood. This wasn't just a hostile environment. It was predatory. It was absorbing things. "We need to get out!" I shouted over the resonator's thrum. "Back the way we came is suicide! Is there another way?" Ben consulted his map, shielding it from the damp. There's a ridgeline marked about half a mile east. Steep, but might lead out of the valley floor's influence. If we can get there. If was the operative word. As we retreated, the forest seemed to come alive. Roots snaked across our path. Thorny bushes grew visibly thicker, barring passage. Trees seemed to shift, closing ranks. Low branches whipped down like grasping arms. The groaning intensified, coming from all around us. It felt like the entire valley was contracting, trying to crush us. We fought our way forward, Ben clearing a path with axe and saw, me keeping the resonator focused on the densest concentrations of hostile flora, Maya scanning for the weakest points in the energy field. It was a desperate, running battle against an enemy that was everywhere. We saw more evidence of the lost researchers. A torn piece of clothing snagged on a thorny vine that seemed disturbingly like a clutching hand, a boot sticking out from the base of another pulsating tree. They hadn't just died here, they'd been assimilated. Finally, bruised, exhausted, and terrified, we reached the base of the ridge. It was a near, vertical wall of rock and tangled roots, slick with moisture, but it felt different. The oppressive presence of the valley floor lessened here. "Go!" Ben urged. Guarding our rear as Maya and I started climbing, finding handholds and footholds among the rocks and less malevolent-looking roots. Below us, the forest floor seemed to writhe, the shadows coalescing, the groaning sound reaching a fever pitch. It knew we were escaping its grasp. We hauled ourselves over the lip of the ridge, collapsing onto relatively open ground, breathing heavily. Looking back down into Skookum, deep was like staring into a churning green moor. The canopy seemed to boil with movement. The sounds echoing up were filled with a primal, frustrated rage. We didn't wait. We scrambled away from the edge, putting as much distance between ourselves and that verdant hell as possible. We eventually made it out, reporting the researchers as lost to an impassable, geologically unstable area. We never spoke of the moving trees, the absorbing bark, the hostile intelligence. Who would believe us? But I knew. Skookum Deep and places like it are a different kind of danger. They don't just hunt you, they engulf you. They digest you slowly, making you part of their ancient, hungry biomass. And being alone in such a place, you wouldn't just vanish. You'd be unmade, atom by atom, consciousness dissolving into the soil, becoming just another whisper in the groaning woods. Your solitude wouldn't just make you vulnerable, it would make you invisible to the outside world while the green closed in. So, add this to the list. Don't explore the woods alone, not just because of the things living in them, but because sometimes the woods themselves are waiting to swallow you whole. And the worst part, sometimes the most dangerous things aren't confined to the deep wilderness. Sometimes they get out. Sometimes the horror comes looking for you, and sometimes being with people is the most dangerous thing of all. That's a story for next time. We've covered a lot of ground, you and I, down paths I haven't walked in my own mind for years. We talked about the raw, physical threats waiting in the deep woods for the lone hiker, like the creeper, simple hunger, brutal efficiency. We talked about the insidious dangers, like the mind leech, that prey on the isolated psyche, turning your own thoughts against you. We even touched upon those ancient, aware places like Skookum Deep, where the forest itself becomes the predator, digesting the unwary. All solid reasons, bought in blood and terror, underpinning my first and most crucial warning: don't explore the woods alone. But I wouldn't be giving you the whole, ugly picture if I stopped there. Because the most terrifying truth, the one that kept me awake long after I hung up my modified tools, is that sometimes the danger doesn't stay contained within those wild places. Sometimes it follows you out, sometimes it learns, and sometimes the greatest danger isn't being alone, it's being with other people. Sometimes safety in numbers is the deadliest illusion of all. This last story, this is the one that cemented my retirement. It wasn't the goriest, maybe not even the most physically demanding, but it struck closer to home, peeled back a layer of security I didn't even know I relied on, and showed me how thin the veneer of normalcy really is. It taught me that some things don't just hunt you in the dark isolation of the forest. They learn to hunt you in the harsh light of your relationships, using trust, fear, and suspicion as weapons. It happened about 12 years ago. A favor for Silas, who was already frail by then. It involved a remote research outpost, high in the Cascade Mountains. Not deep wilderness like Skookum Deep, but isolated enough, a cluster of cabins accessible only by a rough logging road, housing a team of volcanologists monitoring seismic activity around a dormant peak. There were 6 of them. Tight-knit group, supposedly professionals. The call came not through official channels, but via a garbled, panic-stricken radio message picked up by an amateur operator, relayed eventually to Silas's network. The message spoke of strange occurrences, equipment malfunctioning, unsettling noises at night, shadows moving where they shouldn't. Standard spooky stuff, easily dismissed, but then the message mentioned Dr. Aris Thorne, the lead geologist, acting erratically. Paranoia aggression, locking himself in his cabin. Then, abruptly, Thorne seemed fine, apologizing for his behavior. But the message sender, a junior researcher named Lena Petrova, sounded terrified. It's not him. She'd whispered before the transmission cut out. Something's wearing his face. Silas felt it in his walker. Mimic. Something worse, he'd muttered. Could be residual influence from the mountain, old spirits disturbed. Or maybe they brought something back with them from a sampling trip. He looked at me, his eyes clouded with worry. Jake, this isn't a hunt. This is an infiltration. You can't go in loud. You can't trust anyone. Being alone might get you killed quick, but being with the wrong one. He didn't need to finish. The plan was delicate. I couldn't just march in accusing people. I went under the guise of a communications technician, sent to repair their supposedly faulty radio equipment, giving me a plausible reason to be there, and access to the different cabins. Silas arranged for a Park Service helicopter to drop me near the access road, citing maintenance work. From there, it was a tense hike in, carrying my usual tools hidden beneath standard tech gear. The outpost felt wrong the moment I saw it. Nestled in a clearing against the stark backdrop of the snow, dusted peak, the cabins looked huddled, too quiet. No smoke from chimneys despite the chill mountain air. No lights in the windows, even though it was late afternoon. I approached the main cabin, the communal area and lab. The door was unlocked. Inside it was chaos. Papers strewn everywhere, overturned chairs, lab equipment smashed. A dark stain on the floor looked disturbingly like dried blood. No sign of anyone. My gut screamed ambush. I drew the heavy, modified pistol I carried, loaded with silver, alloy rounds, UV cores, and a few other specialized payloads Silas had cooked up. Clearing the cabin methodically, I found nothing but wreckage and the lingering scent of fear. Then, a noise from outside, a door creaking open at one of the smaller residential cabins. I moved cautiously, using the buildings for cover. Peeking around a corner, I saw 3 figures emerge from a cabin, huddled together, looking pale and terrified. Lena Petrova, the one who sent the message, recognized from the personnel photos Silas had procured. Dr. Ben Carter, another geologist, and Dr. Jan Lee, a seismologist. They saw me, and their reaction wasn't relief. It was stark terror. They scrambled back towards their cabin, fumbling with the door. "Wait!" I called out, holding up my hand slowly. "I'm Jake Callahan. Comstech, I'm here to fix the radio." They paused, peering at me with suspicion. Lena, her face bruised, spoke first, her voice trembling.
"How did you get us blocked?"
"A rock slide. Helicopter dropped me off lower down. I hiked the rest of the way. I lied smoothly. What happened here? Where is everyone else?" Hesitantly, they let me inside their cabin. It was cramped, cold, and smelled of fear. They told me a fragmented story. It started subtly, missing items, strange noises, feelings of being watched. Then Thorne started acting weird, paranoid, accusing them of sabotage. He'd had a violent outburst, smashing the lab, then locked himself away. 2 others, Dr. Eva Rostova and a technician named Mike Chen, had gone to check on him yesterday. They hadn't come back. Thorne had emerged this morning, acting completely normal. Cheerful even. Said Eva and Mike had taken a vehicle down the mountain for supplies before the rock slide, which he claimed happened overnight. But the rock slide happened 2 days ago, Ben Carter whispered, his eyes darting nervously towards the windows. We heard it. And Thorne, he wasn't just normal. He was wrong. Too cheerful. His eyes looked flat, empty. He tried to get us to come to his cabin, Janley added, hugging herself. Said he wanted to apologize, clear the air. We refused. He got angry, really angry. Not like Aris angry. Something cold. He went back to his cabin. We haven't seen him since. My blood ran cold. A mimic. Something had taken Thorne, probably killed him, and was now wearing his skin, trying to lure the others. And Eva and Mike. Almost certainly victims too. Where is Thorne's cabin? I asked, keeping my voice calm. They pointed across the small clearing. Cabin 4 dark. Silent, okay? I said. The 3 of you stay here. Lock the door. Barricade it. Don't open it for anyone, not even me. Unless I give you a code word. Let's make it Olympus. Got it. They nodded numbly. I need to check the main radio, see if I can get a signal out. Then I need to check on Thorne. Leaving them felt wrong, but I needed to assess the situation, confirm the threat. I went back to the main cabin, made a show of checking the damaged radio. It was thoroughly smashed, confirming intentional sabotage. Then, heart-pounding, I circled towards cabin 4. The air grew colder as I approached. A faint, rhythmic thump sound came from within. I peered through a grimy window. The sight inside turned my stomach. Thorne, or the thing wearing his skin, stood with its back to me. It was changing. Its form seemed unstable, rippling, shifting between Thorne's appearance and something else underneath, something tall, pale, unnaturally thin, with limbs that bent at wrong angles. It held something that looked like a blood-soaked sponge, rhythmically dabbing at its skin, maintaining the illusion. The thump was the sound of it patting itself. On the floor lay the horribly mangled bodies of Eva Rostova and Mike Chen. It hadn't just killed them. It had used parts of them, tissue, blood, maybe something more, to help construct or maintain its disguise. This was no simple mimic. This was something elaborate, intelligent, and deeply malevolent. A ghoulish impersonator, Silas might have called it, feeding off its victims in more ways than one. Suddenly, it froze. Its head snapped around, rotating almost 180 degrees on Thorne's neck, the borrowed eyes fixing right on the window, right on me. The cheerful facade dropped instantly, replaced by a look of ancient, predatory intelligence and utter contempt. It smiled, Thorne's mouth stretching too wide, revealing too many teeth. I didn't hesitate. Raised my pistol and fired through the window. The specialized round hit its center mass. It shrieked. A sound that was Thorne's voice layered with something clicking and inhuman. It staggered back, but didn't fall. The wound smoked, sizzled, but seemed to be closing. Regenerating. It lunged towards the door. I bolted, sprinting back towards the cabin where the others were hiding.
Olympus!
Let me in! I yelled, hammering on the door. Hands fumbled with the locks. The barricade scraped back, and I tumbled inside just as the Thorne thing burst out of its cabin, moving with uncanny speed across the clearing towards us. It's coming, I gasped, helping them slam the door and ram the barricade back in place. It knows. It's strong. We huddled in the dim cabin, listening to the thing outside. It didn't hammer or roar. It started talking, in Thorne's voice.
Come reasonably, Lena. Ben, Jen.
Let me in! That man is dangerous! He attacked me! He killed Eva and Mike! He's hallucinating. Its voice was perfect Irish Thorne. Plausible. Concerned. If I hasn't, don't listen! I hissed. It's lying. But what if he's right? Ben whispered, his face slick with sweat. What if you're the one? Paranoia. The seed was planted. The creature didn't need brute force if it could turn us against each other. This was its other weapon. He's trying to divide us, Lena insisted, her earlier terror replaced by a flicker of anger. Jake saw it. I believe him. How do we know what he saw? Ben shot back, fear making him irrational. Jian Li was weeping silently in a corner. The Thorne thing outside chuckled, a dry, rattling sound beneath the familiar voice. See, he's turned you already. Just open the door. We can handle him together. There are 3 of us, only one of him. It was trying to fracture the group, isolate me. It needs to feed, I realized aloud, remembering the state of the bodies, the sponge. It needs fresh material to maintain the disguise, maybe to fully regenerate. It wants one of you. Just then, there was a crashing sound from the rear of the cabin. A small back window shattering. Before we could react, something long and pale snaked through the broken glass, an arm, impossibly thin, ending in sharp, bony fingers. It scrabbled blindly, then seized Jianli by the hair. She screamed. Ben, reacting on instinct, grabbed a heavy flashlight and smashed it down on the intruding arm. There was a wet, cracking sound, and the arm spasmed, but didn't release its grip. It started pulling Jean towards the window. I saw my chance. The creature was divided, part of it trying to break in the back, while its main body was still outside the front door. Lena, Ben, hold that arm. Don't let it pull her out. I yelled, moving to the front door. I'm ending this. Taking a deep breath, ignoring their terrified protests, I kicked away the barricade and threw the door open. The thing stood there, its borrowed face contorted in a snarl, surprised by my sudden appearance. I didn't give it time to react. I lunged forward, tackling it low, driving it back from the doorway. We crashed to the ground, wrestling in the dirt. It was immensely strong, cold, its skin feeling disturbingly rubbery beneath Thorn's clothes. Its face flickered, Thorn's features melting momentarily into the pale, eyeless horror beneath. It snapped at me with Thorn's teeth, trying to tear my throat out. I jammed the barrel of my pistol under its chin, ignoring the inhuman shriek, and pulled the trigger. The blast was deafening. The head exploded in a shower of gore, both Thorn's and the creature's pale matter. The body convulsed violently, then lay still. The arm at the back window went limp. Silence descended, broken only by Jianli's ragged sobs, Ben's heavy breathing, and the pounding in my own ears. It was over. But the cost 2 colleagues confirmed dead, brutally used, 3 survivors traumatized, their trust shattered, and me. I looked at the fragmented group, the paranoia that had flared so quickly, the ease with which the creature had turned them against each other, using the illusion of safety in numbers as its hunting ground. We eventually got out, radioed for help using my satellite backup, concocted a believable story about Thorn having a psychotic break. But I knew the truth. The creature, whatever it was, likely originated from somewhere deep within the mountain's influence, maybe drawn out by the drilling or seismic activity. It had learned to wear human skin, mimic human voices, exploit human fear and suspicion. It had turned the outpost, a place of community and collaboration, into a trap. That was the final straw for me. I'd faced down horrors in the lonely dark for decades, but facing one that could wear the face of a friend, that could turn safety into a liability, that felt different, more insidious. It showed that the wilderness's dangers weren't always contained by geography. They could adapt, infiltrate, and hunt us where we felt safest among our own kind. So yes, don't explore the woods alone. It's vital advice. It will save you from the straightforward threats, the hungry things, the disorienting places. But remember too that the things out there are learning. Some have already learned to walk among us, hiding behind familiar faces. Sometimes the call is coming from inside the house. Sometimes the monster isn't the stranger in the dark, but the shadow clinging to someone you trust. I've told you what I know. I've shared the warnings etched into my own sanity. Heed them or not, that's your choice. Just know that the world is older, stranger, and far more dangerous than most people imagine. Keep your eyes open. Trust your gut. And maybe, just maybe, think twice before you step off the path, whether you're alone or in company. Some shadows stretch further than you think. Stay safe out there. Jake Callahan, signing off. For good this time.